Our next speaker is Arun Magesh, and he's going to tell us about running fault injection attacks at home using a very cheap gaslighter, and he's also gonna cover messing with MDM.
Tim, for the introduction. So just to check, my voice is clear, right? Right. Okay. So let's just get into the talk. So today what I'm going to talk about is sort of a different topic which no one have actually touched base on much. It's called as fault injection, and also a little bit more specific on electromagnetic fault injection. Yeah. So to give a gist of who I am, so I am Arun. So I am right now a student, master's student on cybersecurity. I'm also a security researcher, and I also occasionally speak and train people at conferences like Black Hat, DEF CON, Hack in Paris, PH Days, and other conferences. Yeah. So now let's first focus on what exactly is fault injection. So this should give you some idea of what exactly I'm going to talk about. Yeah, so this one should sum you a little bit on what exactly we are dealing with. Fault injection, so in a normal case, or for example, if you're building a software or if you're building a hardware, once you're done with your development, so you will go through some kind of a process, like for example, testing, like manual testing, automated testing, where you basically test with any fault data. So there it's more of a functional testing, which usually developers focus on. But these faults can actually be used for your advantage, and then you can actually take over any system based on that. Sorry. Yeah. Yeah. So the main, I think, yeah, yeah. So yeah, that's exactly what I've told you. So fault is basically to inject any kind of fault inside your application, or be it your application, be it the hardware, be it the network, the communication part. So on fault, in a typical, at least in our tech world, there are two types of fault. Testing which we usually do. So one is your software-based fault injection, and one is your hardware-based fault injection. So software-based fault injection, which is something which I will not be covering because that is slightly bit more vast, and people have already done a lot of work in it. So the basic example for a software fault injection is basically your fuzzing. So you're fuzzing. Let's say if you have a network application, and then you are trying to fuzz it. So where you're actually giving a fault to the system to see if you can actually crash the application or a web server or whatever you're working on. That is something which we are not going to cover much, or we're not going to even cover that part. So in this case, what we are targeting mostly is in the hardware part. Because so even if you take the exploitation part of let's say a vulnerability, so your primary task or objective is to basically have some kind of an access to the internal, let's say the RAM or the what are the file system that is there. Your whole target is to have a read and write access to it. That is from a software. But no one have actually looked into from a perspective of the hardware, because everything, whatever the application you're running, everything will be residing inside your system, the RAM module, or inside your SSD or your hard disk. What if there is a way where you can actually inject a fault inside those hardware, and then maybe you can change the flow of a program? Yeah. So this is what I have told you earlier also. So the software ones are basically your access payloads or even your SQL injection. They are also called as fault injection. Yeah. So hardware, yes. This is basically like you do figure out a way from a hardware perspective on how you can control the flow of operation of any application that's running inside. Uh, is it cheap and easy? It's slightly bit. It depends because here there are a lot of other external factors. For example, if you want to inject a fault, you need to have expensive equipments. For example, you need to have a high sample rate oscilloscope. You need to have a powerful controllable FPGA to inject fault, or you need to have a different the whole framework which are available. So where you can actually use those to attack these devices. And also you need to know the how exactly the chip works for you to inject it. And so it is not only for attacking the program. For example, if your device is using some kind of a cryptographic algorithm, for example, AES has multiple rounds inside it. So you can actually perform a fault injection there. Maybe you can even break a cryptographic algorithm using fault injections. Yeah. So again, there are very less people who are working on hardware fault injection. Even the companies which are working on hardware fault injection are very, very less. But if you look at fuzzing, I think everybody are working on fuzzing the browser, fuzzing Microsoft Office, and fuzzing basically all the network interfaces. But no one have actually looked into the hardware. Also, one of the reason which I feel is because software is something which it's more easily accessible. Whereas, for example, if you want to do a hardware fault injection, one, you need to have the hardware with you, and also you need to have the necessary tools and softwares to actually perform those attacks. And with hardware fault injection, they are highly likely that you will end up breaking the device. So that involves some amount of initial costing to getting into the hardware fault injection. Yeah. So in hardware fault injection, there are different types of it. We'll go through it. I will just give a little gist on what are the other fault injections, but I'll try to focus mostly on electromagnetic fault injection because that is something which is of my interest. So we have primarily the primary ones are voltage glitching, clock glitching, NAND glitching, and then electromagnetic fault injection. And laser fault injection, it's also used, but it is slightly very expensive to perform these attacks on a real hardware. Yeah. So voltage. So if you go back to the basic electrical, if in your, let's say, high school, so there's a formula called as power equal to voltage into current. For example, in your mobile charger, you might have noticed like it's 5 voltage at 1 ampere. So that is basically the amount of the current or the power that your mobile phone needs to charge. But if you look at internally, there'll be a battery that's inside that will be delivering power to the main processor. So that processor will be working at, let's say, 3.3 voltage, and then will be drawing current, let's say, 100 milliamps. So it's like you need to feed that amount of power. Let's say minimum rating it's like 3.300 milliamps. Then you are supposed to provide these two value as a bare minimum for it to operate. So this is where you can actually perform a glitching there. Yeah. So, for example, if you have a very small program which basically checks for a password, the basic command would be, let's say, if str ncmp or str cmp, you compare to password. And if you look in the assembly code, it will be something like a test for this specific register. If it is 0, go to this specific instruction set, or else go to a branch to a different location. So what you can actually do is like for your processor to work, it needs power. What if you were able to somehow figure out the exact location on which that instruction is executed? For example, if there's a test instruction, or if there is a jump 0 instruction, or jump not equal to 0 instructions, because they are basically compare values. So if you can somehow figure out the location, and if you can at that location, if you can reduce the sort of like cut the voltage that is going to the controller, which means your system or your device will not have sufficient power to perform that operation, which means that instruction will be skipped. So once this is recovered, the specific checking, let's say jump not 0 or jump 0, that instruction will be skipped, and then it will go to the next instruction. Basically, you can bypass these instructions just by you controlling the voltage that's going to your controller or processor or whatever. Yeah. So this is for voltage. So we have something exactly similar, which is called as clock glitching. For example, like as important as voltage, there's something called as clock, which is also very important if you're talking about, let's just say, instruction set. So what happens is like, for example, if there is let's say two instruction add, let's say R0, R1. So that, for example, that instruction will, let's say, will take 2 clock cycle. Clock cycle are basically uh, like a like a metronome or some kind of a signal that tells you like what exactly, how exactly there should be some synchronization between each process. For example, let's just say this is 1 clock. So this is basically, let's say let's assume this is going to execute one single instruction, and then this is going to execute another instruction. So it won't be sequential. Again, it depends upon the architecture. If it's an ARM-based one, you have a pipelining, so where you have 4 different sections that happens sequentially. But the idea is basically, this is basically tells you like sequentially how do you execute a specific instruction set. So here, if you look at the diagram, it's again the same. So you have your main clock source. So in a real attacking scenario, you basically create the clock signal. The clock signal frequency usually starts from, let's say, 8 megahertz or 16 megahertz or even higher, depends upon what kind of the processor or the controller you're dealing with. So this is, again, this is also similar to voltage because this is the one which tells you like the processor to execute in this specific time duration. So what an attacker can also do is, again, you can apply a glitch. So a glitch is basically, for example, this is my first instruction. Let's say take some value, put it in my stack, and then compare it with your another scratch pad memory. Check, maybe this is your jump not zero or jump zero, which basically checks, let's say, very basic example, the password. You have a CMP or something, and then these instructions go into check something like individually. So if you inject a fault, you can see this clock signal is not proper because this line has been pulled down. Here also it's being pulled down, which means that there are highly possibility that whatever is going to execute on these 2 clock signal, it's going to be skipped. So in this case, you can actually skip a multiple instruction. Again, the same case for this and also is to actually identify when exactly to glitch. So for that, you need to, for example, reverse engineer the firmware or the bootloader to understand, okay, fine, this is the flow. For example, you can, once you have the firmware, you can know like, okay, fine, if I have this routine, let's say if I'm entering my password, this goes to this function. And then after a specific clock cycle, you can calculate those time duration. And then you can do a bit of trial and error. And then you can identify where exactly you should inject the fault. Yeah. So these are mostly almost the same. The next one is something a bit more different. This is called as NAND glitching. So this is mostly works for embedded devices, mostly works for embedded devices. So how exactly it works? Let's say your main processor, you have a RAM, and you have your the storage. That's your NAND. So NAND, it's a parallel memory, just a technology which they use it to save all your data. So that is basically external IC, which you can see it in the board. So what actually in the booting happens is like once your kernel is being loaded in, the bootloader is loaded inside your processor, the bootloader tells you to extract the whole content of your NAND, saves it inside your RAM, and then your process starts booting from the RAM. So here what you can actually do is like, this is basically to trick your device into getting into the bootloader mode. So for example, there are a lot of devices. So you have your main application end. So application will let's say if it's not giving you direct root access, or if it is having some kind of a restricted shell. So what you can actually do is like, or let's just say you don't have access to the firmware at all, or you need to have some way to have an entry point to your device. So what here you can do is like, so this is how your standard NAND flash looks like, and then these are all parallel. It has like I think 8 data bus and then 8 control bus, which basically talks to this IC and then like tells you what gets the data and everything. So typically what they would do is like, you basically short those data lines. Basically, if it's 8-bit, you basically take a couple of bits connected to the ground, which means the data and those 4 bits are going to be 0. So when your bootloader loads those content inside your RAM, few data will be corrupted. So usually bootloader has some sort of a fail-safe console. So once the kernel finds that the main user space is corrupted, it goes back to the bootloader, drops it into the shell, And then from the bootloader, you basically, it's a very restricted shell, sort of shell, but it has a little bit more access to the hardware of the device. Let's say you can actually dump the whole RAM, or you can even dump the whole content of your the NAND flash, or you can basically like do a firmware update, extract the firmware back. Even you can put some kind of a backdoor inside the device. Yeah. Yeah. So next is something which I am more interested in. That is your electromagnetic fault injection. So far we have talked about all kind of fault injection where which user needs a physical access to it. For example, for voltage glitching or clock glitching or even NAND, an attacker should actually open the device and then let's say connect some wire to it or do some tampering with it. So there is another way. By using electromagnetic field, you can also inject these fault inside. So now let's go back to the little bit high school science. So you know the basic electromagnetic law, like whenever electric current passes through a conductor, it is going to emit a magnetic field. That is basically left thumb rule. So basically this is, let's say, a wire, and then the current is being passed. Basically like let's say if we are connecting battery to it, which means there are going to be some electrical field being generated in this wire. And that is being calculated by the inductance of the conductor and the current that is being passed. This is not really needed in this context, but in the future, if you're building something on your own, this might come in handy. Yeah. Now, why do we need to focus on this? Because so the same property applies for every single devices. Because, for example, if you take a circuit board or any PCB, so it is filled with metals. It is filled with, let's say, conductors, current carrying conductors, which means there are some parameters which are linked to the electromagnetic. So there's something called a side channel analysis, where people actually measure those micro electromagnetic field releasing from those controllers, RAM or ROM, and then from there they were able to crack the let's say some cryptographic algorithm that is being placed inside. So to give you an idea, so this is how your typical processor or a controller looks like. So this one, I think, let's say this one looks like your RAM. Maybe this one looks like maybe a ROM, and these are just other cores, let's say GPIO or some other peripherals that it has to deal with. So yeah, now, so here if you look at it, it looks way too messy because it's just the picture of the die. Yeah, now the inside, how does it work? So for example, if you look at the ROM, so the basically this is how your ROM looks like. For example, these are basically small flip-flops, basically small switches. So whenever you, let's say, write some data, basically this will turn on all these flip-flops electrically. And then whenever they want to read it, they can directly read it by putting the address, and then the data content will add, and then you can get the output. And this is how it looks in the silicon level. But basically in the inside, it's just some bunch of transistors and some polyfuses that tells you like what exactly is 10001. So, and then you get it. Now, same case for your RAM. So in this case, ROM, it's, as you know, it is basically you can program it, and then you can retain it for a longer duration. But when it comes to when it comes to RAM, it is a volatile memory, which means like whenever you do a power reset, the data is going to be erased. So here it is exactly the same. Only difference is like instead of a user controllable or a static fuse, they are using capacitors. So capacitors are like a very small batteries. There are very small batteries which can hold charge for like very less than let's say 1 millisecond or even less than that. So what they do is like, that's why there's something called a refresh rate for RAM. That basically tells you like how long you're going to refresh it. So whenever you charge these, and these are basically your RAM. So here also it's just a RAM, and then you can see like it's the orientation exactly the same. You have your address, and then you get your output data. Yeah, yeah. Now we know how exactly it works in the inside. Like we know a RAM. How does it look? RAM is basically a transistor and a capacitor coupled together, and then your ROM is basically a small fuse and another transistor connected together. But when I say connected together, so there has to be some kind of a medium to connect. So usually they use metal like a metal substrate. So all these connection will be in terms of layering. Yeah. Now let's do the reverse of what we have learned so far. So not so far, the first part. So in the first part, we have learned that whenever a correct current carrying conductor can generate the magnetic field, the same case is also true in terms of the reverse. Whenever you place a magnetic disturbance next to a conductor, that is also going to create some amount of electrical charge in it. So best example is your wireless charger. So you have your inductive wireless charger, which basically works on these two principles. So your charger will have a coil that will give some amount of electricity to it, and that creates the electromagnetic field. And then your phone will have another coil that will receive those electromagnetic the fields or the force, and then it generates the power back, and then it sends it back to your phone. So here it's again the same. So now what we can actually do is like we can combine these two logic and then sort of glitch it. So here the idea, for example, this is for your RAM. So what if, since we know these are just your magnetic like electrical wires, and they will exhibit a property of electromagnetic induction, which means whenever I apply a electromagnetic field in this loop, it is going to create some amount of electricity, and that is going to change something inside. For example, if it is a RAM, it is either going to charge the capacitor, or it's going to, let's say, short the capacitor and drain it, or if it is a RAM, it may even trigger the fuse, and then you can change these parameters. Yeah. Yeah. So this is so the idea is basically to use those magnetic field to basically interfere with these components, be it your RAM, ROM, or even you can even directly inject in the CPU all the where all your instruction being executed. Yeah. So few pointers on the injection is like one. So if you look at any IC, it will be cased with a very proper, let's say sometimes even aluminum casing, or sometimes in epoxy. So you need to really have a very high powerful electromagnetic injector. So because that has to actually go till pass through all those layers, and then has to actually hit those silicon substrate that is inside your chip. So that is there. And also second problem is like, for example, this is basic, let's say 8x8. But if you look at here, so a typical controller or a processor will have, let's say 512 KB. That is going to be very, very huge. So let's say this is just a, let's say 4 to 5 centimeter square IC. So then finding out the location of the RAM, and then identifying where exactly to put your, let's say, the fault, and then identify what to actually know where exactly something is happening. So that is something which is going to take a lot of time to understand. Most other cases, what people do is like they try to decap the IC, then take a high quality photograph like this, and then they try to manually map where exactly the main thing is. Like this could look like, let's say, some kind of a buffer. This looks like a RAM. This looks like some other thing, and then they try to map it in the physical IC, and then they can target individual. Again, it's going to be random, but at least it's better to glitch on exactly here rather than glitching somewhere here or here. Yeah. So again, so I have built a very, very cheap version of the fault injector. Again, any kind of fault injection, there are high possibility that you will end up breaking the device. So because it's going to be a very strong electromagnetic field, and it is going to change few bits that are inside your device which you're not supposed to flip, or it can even create a short circuit inside your silicon, and then the device will not even work. So it's better to experiment with the development board or your own different setup before you actually trying it on your real testing device. So there are a lot of other professional ones, like for example, ChipShouter and also Rescuer. They have so many fault injection tools. Yeah. So my build is very, very simple one. For example, I got a electric gas lighter. So electric gas lighter where, or you can even use your electric cigarette lighter. So they basically generate close to around 2 to 4 kilo voltage from a very small, let's say lithium ion or even a normal alkaline batteries. So in this case, I had two parts. This is basically like here the circuit which they are using is called as flyback driver. Basically from small voltage, you can basically boost it to several thousand voltage. Only the voltage is increased, but not your current. So you will feel a little bit of pain if you touch the, the high voltage part, but it is not very lethal. Yeah. So my idea of the injector is basically very simple. So I used the same high voltage circuit from my previous slide. So this gives me let's say 2 to 4 kilovolt, and then I connect to a spark gap. So spark gap, I used it because the way your flyback driver works, it has a very big capacitor. So it needs to charge the capacitor, and then it releases the voltage. So this spark gap is basically like to ionize the air between, and then once it charges sufficiently, let's say if it reaches 3 to 4 kilovolt, then it jumps so that I know I'm getting sufficient amount of voltage for me to use it there. And it's not directly coupled. So you don't need to worry about shorting the capacitor side. It is basically ionizing the air, and then your spark will jump there, kind of sort of context closes the circuit, and then the current flows through this ferrite inductor. So this is again what I told you, like a current carrying conductor is going to generate some amount of magnetic field. Here I have made a small, very small coil with a ferrite core. That is something you can salvage from any old PCB. Yeah, this is how it looks. I've just created a spark gap at the other side, and then this is my a ferrite. It's basically a very small inductor, and like 4 to 5 turns of wire. I just connected it back, and this is how my EM fault injector. So this typically would cost you like less than let's say $4 to $5. And this actually worked, and also I wouldn't recommend doing testing it on some very critical device. Maybe you can just experiment with it, and then once you're confident, maybe you can get a better version, or you can just try to make sure you use it in a safer manner. Yeah. So now, before I get to the main Android MDM part, I will first experiment with something which I already have. So I used Arduino board. Arduino is a very cheap development board for Atmel-based processors. So I just wrote a very simple code. Uh, yeah. I just basically wrote a very simple code to basically check the password that is being sent serially via the USB. Basically, like it is like a very small if-else condition. If the password equal to this, do that. If it is not there, do something else. So my objective is to use the fault injection to see if I can skip it. The logic is the same. Let's say you have something important to check. If the password is wrong, it will not go a pass. But if you can actually do some kind of injection, let's say EM fault injection, voltage or clock, you basically skip the instruction because in this case you are attacking the CPU. So sometimes you glitch, your processor will not know what to do, and there are high chances that because of some internal fault, it will maybe skip, or some bits inside will be, since a EMF field is going to induce charge in those silicon. There are times where few registers or the few internal buffer values that are going to be changed. So that would result in bypassing the check. So again, this is not something which you will get it all the time. So you need to experiment a lot of time with the location or how much the distance between your chip and also your injector. That is also going to be a major factor. So this is the example code I have read. I'm just getting the data serially. I'm just checking if my value is equal to this. Just switch on and some turn on the LED. If it is not or something else, then switch on something else. Yeah, I can show the demo. Yeah, quickly. Yeah, so this is the basic code. sorry. So this is the Arduino code. Basically, I'm enabling the serial port, works at 9600 baud rate, and then the LED pin. Yeah. So that is just a serial port, and then I'm taking it, like reading 1 byte at a time, putting it inside a buffer, and then I'm just checking the value, whether it's magic word. That is something we are going to crack. If I just made it like the other else condition as if reaching equal to na. In this case, it will be like if else, then you go to switch off or no access or whatever, and then you're just gonna remove it and then loop it for multiple time to clear the buffer. I'm just flashing it in the device. So to just demonstrate whether it's working or not, it just tells you like it's switched off. But if I give magic word, it just switched on. It's just to tell you like, okay, fine, this is working. So in my PC side, I just made a very small Python script. I used the PySerial to open the UART port for my Arduino, and then I was just sequence like I'm just say keep sending the else part, keep sending, and then see if I can basically see if I can sort of bypass it, and then make sure if I can go to the other condition by injecting the fault, the EM fault injection using the device which I made. I'm just sending the nav with your. So in this case, I'm just getting the switching off. I think I was doing the glitching. So if you look at some point, since I've already told it's not like a one time where you glitch it and it's going to work. There are times where you will end up putting the device in a false state. Like for example, it'll just halt, it'll not do anything, or it'll be in a corrected state because you will be interfering with the things there. Yeah. So if you look at here, I was able to get one successful glitch. In this case, it's just like switched on. So I think it went off. Yeah. So here you got the switched on. So again, it's not a foolproof or like this is going to work. It's most of the injection or the EM fault. It's mostly trial and error, and then you get like you can sort of bypass. So here it's not very complicated like your let's say your software based ones where you need to actually like know where exactly to put your op chain or op gadget or whichever. And the advantage of this one is mostly works very easily in terms of low end device. For example, if you have a POS machine, so they will not run a proper complete Linux. They'll be running some kind of a barebone OS. So there, the logic will exactly be the same like this. If it is this, do that. So there you can actually inject a glitch, and then you can basically skip specific instructions or skip some specific part, and then you can maybe bypass some restrictions there. Yeah. So next one is something which I have, so far it's all like a little bit on the low level. So this is something which I have done in the past. So we have Android mobile device management, your Android MDM. So we have the same MDM on your Windows machine, your Mac, your Apple. So these are some kind of policies or some kind of restrictions that let's say if you're working for an organization, and then let's say if you want to actually like give a mobile phone to your employers, but there you don't want them to open Facebook or some random torrents website. So where I think using these features provided by Android, you can actually enforce these rules where you can actually restrict. Restrict and then tell that okay, fine, these are the only feature you can do. If you do that, it won't actually work. Yeah. So usually there are two parts. One, this comes in the form of admin policies that you might have seen it in your Android settings somewhere. That is from your Android. Even a manufacturer, for example, Samsung has their own MDM management called as Knox, and similar different vendor have their own implementations. So there are different ways people use it to bypass. So when they start implementing their own security measures, which can integrate with the Android's admin policies. Yeah. Yeah. So in this case, the device under test is a Android device, and the thing is like this Android device is not yet being released, so I will not have any public information regarding the device. And the main objective of the whole exercise is for me to put the device in the debug mode. So debug mode, it's like a bit more superior, like a bootloader mode. So the whole idea there is to in the debug mode where you can actually perform a lot of operation like for example, you can extract the firmware, change the firmware, you can dump the whole internal flash, you can even dump the RAM content for any keys or anything that is there. So in this case, that is there. So in this case, the OEM have actually created the firmware, which actually implements the MDM from the firmware level, which means the firmware, it's custom-made firmware for a specific OEM or a specific company. So your objective is to break that MDM capability, and then all the standard Android debug, everything is closed. Yeah. So there, in this case, most of the debug the parts are disabled. For example, your standard ADB, your fast boot, or your recovery mode, it's all locked by the firmware. So even if the traditional way is to basically press your power button and your volume door, it puts you in your fast boot or your recovery mode. So that is also everything is disabled. And for me to even compile my own custom bootloader, I will not find the source code because the device is still not released. And then the Android that's running inside, it's Android 10, and it was completely patched. So I cannot actually use any public exploit that is available for at that moment to actually exploit the device or get a root access and then see if I can uninstall those MDM applications. So in these devices, they basically install a system applications. And then my objective is to basically remove those application or completely clean the whole, the firmware itself. Yeah, so my target was the RAM because everything, so the main chip, it was working. It doesn't have an external flash memory. The processor have a internal eMMC inside. So I think it is running on ARM, some Cortex version, and then it had like 16 GB internal flash. It's all in a single IC, so I cannot attack it because there are too many components inside. So then my attack was to target the RAM, since I have told you like everything is actually running on the RAM. So whenever your OS in the RAM, for example, if you're saving some file, basically OS sends a command to the flash memory to actually modify those files inside the flash. So all the OS will actually run from your RAM. So I thought I will attack the RAM module. So I actually was not intended to try it. So I was just randomly trying it during one of our PT engagement. So the good thing is like when I was able to attack, so I was able to create some sort of a kernel panic in the Android itself. So what happens is like so all your kernel and everything is loaded inside your RAM. When I was able to attack the RAM, I think the RAM, the few of the capacitors that is there in the RAM module was able to flip, I think maybe few bits, and then that was able to crash it. So Android or the bootloader, the kernel has something called as debugfs. So debugfs, it is like you're a bit more of a debug mode for developers to actually, kernel developers specifically to actually way to debug the kernel part of the whole Android OS. So in the debug FS, they actually let you do the whole systemping part, and then it'll give you all the stack trace, and then it also saves all the system inside your SD card. And also in the same way, so when there's also some USB cables inserted, which means in the same debug FS, they have enabled the internal debug port. This is not your standard, your ADB or fastboot. This is the debug port for the processor itself. So that is something you can, Android doesn't have control over, or the kernel, it has control over, but not too much control over. So if once I have this access, since the devices may be different, but the processor is from a very famous vendor. So then I was able to get the tools necessary for these for that specific processor, and then I was able to connect to the using that debug mode. From there, that gives me so many features. Like for example, I can dump the whole RAM or even extract the whole firmware, including all the hidden firmware that is there in your internal memory. And then once I have that, I can also change few other parameters inside. and then that lets me sort of bypass the MDM application. Once that MDM is application, then basically I take over the whole device. I can root the device, remove the log, take the content, and I can basically do anything on that. Yeah. So this was something which I did. And then the problem is like it didn't work with me in the first try. So I had to try it multiple times for me to get this specific crash. And there are times you will not find the same crash. There are times where you will find different crashes, different crash. So it is basically like where exactly you're trying to glitch it, and also a little bit of distance between XY coordinate from your glitching to your device. And if you really want to convert it into code execution, there are ways. I think there's one article or a blog by Realize. So they actually use the electromagnetic fault injection to basically decrypt the encrypted firmware, and then they are able to, let's say, extract it or do other operations. So that takes a little bit of reversing on how exactly the bootloader works, how exactly the encryption works in the bootloader part. So what did we actually cover? We covered a little bit of what exactly is fault injection and different types of fault injection. And we went a little bit of working of this fault injection, like why it is actually happening. How can you actually create those fault injection? And then I made a very small demo on using a Arduino. And then I just explained to how exactly I was able to bypass the Android MDM by using my very cheap, like $3-4, the fault injector. And these are some very good resource. This is the one which I've told you about, like bypassing the secure boot part. This is something which these are really good resources which you can check it. And thank you so much for all for being there in the talk. And I'm really sorry for the small break in the middle. I think my battery got drained. I forgot to turn on the switch for my laptop. So yeah, I really apologize for that. So if you have any questions, you can always drop me an email. And I'm more active on the Twitter. You can catch me in Twitter. And thank you for the whole standoff team. Yeah.
Thanks, Arun. I think the main question from my side, at the beginning you said you can feel some pain. How much pain it was?
To give you a slight jolt, but not to a point where you have to be admitted in a hospital. So.
Okay, so next question is, did this project actually come from a specific task, or that was curiosity at the beginning? You wanted to understand how fault injections work, and this is where it comes from.
Can you repeat the question again? Sorry.
So, did you had a specific task where you needed to apply fault injection and you had to learn everything from the beginning, or that was just a curiosity and this is the result of curiosity what is shown to us today?
I think it is sort of both, because fault injection is something I've been reading up on it for quite some time. And then I was just experimenting with out of just curiosity. I made the device, and then it was just a PT engagement. And then I was just trying that in a real device, and then luckily it worked. And I mean, like the Arduino part, which is a very standard one, but the way I was able to bypass the MDM implementation was something like that. That's completely out of curiosity.
All right. Thank you so much. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Tim.